So here we are. When you look at the life of Genghis Khan, don't just see the conqueror. Don't just see the maps being redrawn or the empires falling. Look at the man who was once a starving child, hidden in the tall grass, terrified that the next sunrise would be his last. His story is the ultimate proof that you are not a prisoner of your origin. You are not defined by the family you were born into, the betrayals you've suffered, or even the devastating failures that nearly broke you. Genghis Khan shows us that true power isn't found in comfort. It's forged when you take the raw, jagged edges of your trauma and sharpen them into a disciplined vision. It's found when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How can I use this to build something stronger?" He transformed the very thing that threatened his life, the tribal chaos, the siege warfare, the treachery, into the gears of a system that lasted for generations. Your life is no different. That failure, that heartbreak, that feeling of being an outsider in your own life, that isn't the end of your story. That is your training ground. It is the friction required to refine your character. You have the power to turn your greatest threat into the bedrock of your legacy, but only if you have the courage to stop making excuses and start building your system. Now, I want you to be honest with yourself. What is that one failure, that massive, crushing defeat that you've been running from? What if that exact moment wasn't a stop sign, but the most important lesson you were ever meant to learn? Take a moment. Think about it. Then leave a reflection in the comments. Let's talk about how you're turning your own wreckage into a foundation. I'm listening. How many times have you stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., feeling like the world has already decided your fate? Maybe it's a string of bad luck that won't let up, or the sting of a betrayal that makes you want to quit altogether. We've all felt that suffocating weight, the sense that we're simply meant to stay broken. But imagine a young boy, abandoned in the frozen wasteland of the Mongolian steppe. He wasn't born a king. He was a starving orphan, cast out by his own tribe, hunted like an animal, and sold into slavery. By every logic of the human world, he should have died in the dirt. But he didn't. Today we're looking at how a man who was discarded by everyone built an empire from the ashes of his own misery. This isn't just a story about a conqueror. It's a masterclass on how to turn your darkest failure into the foundation of your legacy. Picture the Mongolian steppe. It's not just cold. It's a landscape that wants you dead. No mercy, no shelter, just endless, biting wind. This is where Temüjin, the man the world would come to fear as Genghis Khan, was born. His life was anchored by his father, Yasuge, a powerful chieftain. But at just 9 years old, that anchor was violently ripped away. A rival tribe, the Tatars, poisoned his father. And in that brutal world, the moment the strong man falls, the vultures begin to circle. Imagine this. Your father is dead, and the very people who once bowed to him now look at you with contempt. Your own tribe decides you are a liability. They don't just kick you out. They strip you of your livestock, your food, and your protection. They left you and your family to starve in the wilderness. For 6 long years, Temüjin didn't live. He survived. He was a fugitive in his own land. He lived on wild onions, field mice, and scraps of carrion. There were days he was hunted, captured, and forced into a wooden cage, wearing a heavy, crushing collar of wood around his neck. He was essentially a slave, an unperson, exposed to the elements, waiting for death to make the final move. Most people in that situation would have folded. They would have accepted the label of the broken boy. But look closely at those 6 years. That wasn't just suffering. It was a forge. It was the place where he learned that loyalty isn't something you're born with. It's something you carve out with your own two hands. He learned that when the world gives you nothing, you don't ask for it back. You build it yourself, brick by blood-soaked brick. But rising from the dust is only half the battle. The real test of a man's character doesn't happen in the wilderness. It happens when he finally has something to lose. As Temüjin began to gather strength, he faced a shadow of his own making, Jamukha. They were once blood brothers, bound by oaths that should have lasted a lifetime. But power reveals the fault lines in every relationship. Jamukha believed in the old ways, that leadership was a birthright, written in your bloodline. He was the aristocrat, the legacy player. Temüjin, he saw it differently. He saw that true strength wasn't about who your father was. It was about what you could produce. This clash wasn't just a political argument. It was a fundamental war of ideas. Then came the Dalan Baljut, a nightmare. Temüjin stood with his forces against Jamukha, but he was outnumbered, battered, and ultimately crushed. Imagine the crushing weight of that defeat. 30,000 soldiers bearing down on your 20,000. The sheer chaos of horses, screaming, and the realization that your vision for a new world was being trampled into the mud. Worse than the steel of the enemy was the poison of betrayal. His own circle, the people he trusted with his life, began to fracture. When you rise, you become a target.
Are you certain we weren't
Every
followed?
success you achieve creates a coalition of those who feel threatened by your existence.
Then we strike at midnight.
They didn't just want to beat him. They wanted to erase him. At this moment, Temüjin sat in the ruins of his plans. He had lost the battle, he had lost his closest brother, and he was being squeezed from every side by established powers who viewed him as a barbarian interloper. It's easy to be a leader when you're winning. It's an entirely different thing to be a leader when your friends have turned their backs, your army is scattered, and everyone, absolutely everyone, is telling you that you've reached your limit. This is where most people quit. They settle. They become a cautionary tale. But Temüjin didn't look for a way out. He looked for the crack in the armor of his failure. Here is where the narrative shifts from simple survival to strategic mastery. Most people in Temüjin's shoes would have sought revenge. They would have burned everything down in a blind rage. But Temüjin did something different. He stopped reacting and started rebuilding. He looked at his failure at Dalan Baljut and realized his old way of fighting was obsolete. He didn't blame his men. He blamed his own system. So he scrapped it. He instituted a meritocracy, a cold, hard reality check for his followers. Your status is no longer tied to your family name, your clan, or your noble blood. It's tied to your skill, your loyalty, and your results. Period. He didn't just promote soldiers. He engineered a machine. He implemented a decimal system, tens, hundreds, thousands, creating a level of discipline that turned a disorganized rabble of horsemen into a single, terrifying, synchronized organism. And then there's his greatest pivot, the lesson of the wall. Early on, Temüjin's armies were baffled by fortified cities. They were nomads. They knew how to ride, not how to siege. They failed repeatedly against the Jin and Western Shia dynasties. But instead of walking away and calling it a loss, he studied his enemies. He watched how they held the walls, how they used siege engines, and he absorbed that intelligence. He took his enemy's greatest strength and turned it into his own. This is the psychological core of the man.
It throws massive
He
stones
possessed a
over any wall.
radical, almost
Your machines
ruthless
break the
level of
iron
humility.
gates. Yes, if the plate
He was willing to be a student in the middle of a war. He understood something that most of us struggle with today. When he conquered a tribe, he didn't just slaughter them. If a rival surrendered, he absorbed their talent. He took their blacksmiths, their engineers, their strategists, and gave them a place in his new world. He saw that the people who tried to destroy him were actually the missing pieces of his own success. He transformed his pain, the trauma of his father's murder, and the sting of his brother's betrayal into a rigid, unbreakable code of law. He turned the chaotic, backstabbing tribal politics into a streamlined system of absolute accountability. He didn't just conquer the world. He conquered the idea that the past has to dictate the future. He proved that if you are willing to evolve, to learn from your worst defeats, and to set aside your ego for the sake of your vision, you don't just overcome your obstacles, you consume them. How does this resonate with the challenges you're facing right now?